Hey guys, welcome back. This is my first video in a few months. I have been very busy, and it has been a long time since my last video. A devlog of my puzzle game is right around the corner, but this video is going to be about my recent game jam experience. Last week I wrapped up my entry for GameOff2020, which is a game jam lasting all of November, hosted by GitHub. The theme of the game jam was Moonshot, which can mean a few different things: landing a spacecraft on the moon, an extremely ambitious and innovative project, or a home run characterized by its great height. So when it came to ideas, right away I knew the jam was going to be filled with spaceships and space flight themed games. So I knew that I wanted to avoid that. On the other hand, I figured a lot of people wouldn't know what Moonshot means, so the ambitious project kind of meaning is a little bit too vague. I knew I wanted something space themed, but avoiding the generic spacecraft theme. The idea was, playing as the Earth, you have the moon as your single weapon, you fire that out to destroy space debris. It was an okay idea, but the number of game jams that I've seen that use single bullet type mechanics, I just figured it wouldn't be that interesting, and it didn't really scream fun yet. I really wanted to do a bullet hell just outside of the game jam, and it kind of just fell into place that the projectiles aimed at you in a bullet hell could become the moons that you shoot with. So playing as a non-Earth planet, you could grab rocks that enter your orbit to collect them as moons and then fire them back out at enemies. Pluto seemed like the perfect planet to be the main character. I figured this was a good mix between fun and theme fitting, so that's what I went with. I watched a lot of shooter and bullet hell style games over the first couple of weeks. Watching stuff like Enter the Gungeon made me want to incorporate some kind of room mechanic, so it wasn't just endless waves of enemies, but rather some sort of progression. And talking of enemies, it was time to start making some. So the majority of the game was going to be randomly generated enemies in a room, and each room was going to have a difficulty that ramps up. So the more rooms you clear, the stronger and more enemies that you have to fight, and eventually you have to fight the planets as bosses, and then it would go back to swarms of smaller enemies afterwards. The two main groups of enemies that I have in the game are asteroids and stars, and every enemy has a different firing pattern. So these moon enemies and the black hole enemies that I've drawn here, I didn't have time to add to the jam. You can see that I'm just kind of churning them out, and the ones that I like in the end are the ones that are going to make it to the game. I also added Pluto, who is, for all intensive purposes, a circle with eyes and legs. So creative. And I also added some really quick rocks just to add as obstacles. They're going to provide some shelter until they get destroyed. So the base feature of the game is very simple. You run around, enemies fire bullets at you, and you just gotta stand next to them to pick them up and throw them back. It's that easy. But the thing that I think is really important when it comes to especially a game jam game, which is kind of just a proof of concept kind of game, is adding like the feel good stuff. So that's all of the stuff that makes the game feel interactive and responsive. So that's animation, that's special effects, sound, all of that stuff. So I downloaded Sprite, which is a free pixel animation software, to make some stuff. My pixel art fully sucks, but I do know how to animate, so I'm gonna use explosions and special effects to kind of amp everything up. Animating Pluto was probably the most tedious part. It's definitely not a great result, but I think everything else kind of makes up for it. The first thing that I did that I was kind of confident with was making some explosions, so I made some explosions for each bullet type that I had so far. So every time a bullet hits something, it's going to create a little explosion and a sound. There's also some dust that gets kicked up when you run, and also like a big puff when you dash. And also when you go into the orbit mode, it changes the dust particles so it becomes a bit more like a trail. Lastly, I made a really quick explosion effect when you destroy an enemy, and it also gives a little bit of screen shake. And these were the easiest and smallest parts of the jam, but I think in the final project they really kind of shine the most, because they're the part that make you feel good when you press buttons, which is essentially what you play a game to do. One of the last things I added was a boss. So originally I planned to add 3 bosses, but as the weeks went on, I ran out of time, so I ended up just adding 1. In the end, I decided to make Neptune. His attack pattern is a lot more complex than the base enemies, and he can fill a screen by himself, and he also takes a lot more hits to kill. I animated some stupid faces in A-Sprite, and I also made some unique bullets for him to make the boss battle a little more interesting. In the game I ended up putting him on level 16 because I thought that was around the level where his attack pattern was not a huge jump from the previous room, but in retrospect not a lot of people were able to get that far, and I wish I had dropped the level a little just so that players didn't miss out on a big part of the experience. Anyways, then the game was done, so all that was left was a menu screen and a cheesy intro, and that's everything. The feedback has been really good actually. The majority of comments I think are praise to the enjoyability of the game once they grasp the mechanic, and most of the critique was wishing that the mechanics were a bit more transparent with regards to orbit range and what projectiles are meeting the criteria for orbiting. So when I go back and edit this game, I'm definitely going to add like a range indicator or a tutorial so new players can pick up the mechanics a lot easier and start to enjoy the game faster. I would like players to reach higher levels so they get to experience like the really manic bullet hell part of the game, and I think a lot of players will need power-ups to reach that. Yeah, I definitely learned a lot. Every single thing that I did in the game jam was something new. I've never used Unity 2D before. I've never done any kind of spawning or random generation. Eventually I would like to share some of these things that I'm learning on this channel. I know that a lot of people that follow me or watch these sorts of videos are making their own games, and it would be cool to share what I learn. So I'm going to leave a link to the game that I made below called Meteors Are Murder. Check it out if you want, as well as other games in the jam. There's a lot of really fun ones. And over the next week I'm going to make a video to update you guys on my 3D puzzle game. It's just taking a bit longer than I thought it was going to, and it's just been important to take some breaks, and I'm just horrible with updating things. I need to start becoming more consistent, so that's something that I'm working on. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more, and follow me on Twitter if you want to see more regular updates. Alright, see you next time.